Today we're going to continue with lesson 9.3, which is the solving by taking the square root method. All right, so in the last video, every equation that we solved, the x squared was isolated or completely alone, and so all we had to do was take the square root of both sides. However, in bold here, it says sometimes you have to isolate the x squared first before you solve quadratic equations. So we have to always thinking about getting the x squared by itself if we see that there's any type of number on the same side. So let's take a look. Notice that in this first example here, the x squared term has a -9 on the same side. So how do I move a -9 over to the other side of the equation? Well, the opposite of a negative would be a positive. So I'm going to add 9 to both sides. That gets rid of that on the left, giving you just the x squared term by itself, which is what we wanted. 0 plus 9 is 9. Now we're back to what we did in the last video. All I have to do is take the square root of both sides to get then the x completely by itself. Remember, when we take the square root of 9, you can use the multiplication chart to look for two of the same numbers. Once again, remember in the multiplication chart, if you look at the highlighted diagonal yellow numbers, that's going to get you then these perfect square numbers, which then gives you the answer. Or you can use your calculator. So once again, if you have a handheld calculator, you can use that. Otherwise, you can use the Desmos calculator that's on Schoology. But remember, the button for the square root is over here on the far left. So if I click that, and then if I take the square root and then I put 9 underneath it, notice that it gives you one of the answers. It gives you +3. So then we have to remember that +3 is not the only answer because yes, 3 times 3 is going to multiply to get you 9. But don't forget, a -3 times a -3 will also get you that. So that's why I like to put the plus or minus sign in front. So my answers are both positive as well as -3. Okay, so that's what we're going to be doing with these examples here. We're going to get the x squared term by itself, then we'll solve just like we did in the last video. So notice that in part A, x squared minus 1 equals 0, just like the example I showed above, we got to get that -1 to the other side. So I'm going to add it over to the other side, getting rid of it on the left. That gives you just the x squared term by itself. 0 plus 1 is 1. And now we're back to, okay, to get rid of a square, I'm going to take the square root. That will give me the x by itself. I do not want to lose the fact that I will have two answers, both a positive as well as a negative. You can type it into your calculator, or maybe you can think what's the same number that multiplies to get you 1, and that would be 1. So both a positive as well as a -1 would be my answer. Notice that in part B here, we have 2x squared minus 72 equals 0. This time, there are two numbers on the same side as the x squared. So think about how do we solve a two-step equation. I want to move any number that is not attached to it first. So that means that -72, we are going to add over to the other side first. That will get rid of it on the left. We'll then still have a 2 with the x squared. Then that equals 0 plus 72, which is 72. So we're still not ready to take the square root yet because there's a 2 being multiplied by the x squared. So how do you undo multiplication? We have to divide. So if I divide 2 on the left, I'm dividing 2 on the right. That will get rid of the 2, giving you then the x squared, which is what we wanted by itself. 72 divided by 2, you can type it into your calculator, and we're going to get 36. Now it's isolated by itself, where I can take the square root of both sides. That will give you then the x by itself. Use the multiplication chart, plug this into your calculator. Just don't forget we will have both a positive as well as a negative, but the square root of 36 is going to give us 6. And these are my two answers. If we take a look at the next example, 27 minus 3x squared equals 0. Once again, there are two numbers on the same side. I gotta move the number that is not connected to the x squared. So notice that's the 27. It starts as a positive because you always look at the sign that's in front. So how do you get rid of a positive? We're going to subtract it. So we'll subtract 27, getting rid of it on the left. But now notice the negative sign was really with the 3. So we'll have a negative 3x squared. That's going to equal 0 minus 27 is going to give us a negative 27. Now, just like the last example, I got to get rid of the negative 3 because it's being multiplied. To undo multiplication, I'm going to divide both sides by negative 3. That's going to get rid of those negative 3's on the left, leaving you just with the x squared. Notice that on the right, a negative divided by a negative is a positive. And now we're back to, okay, I can take the square root of both sides. And hopefully you notice it's just like the example above. We're going to have both a positive as well as a negative 3. So be very careful to know where are the negative signs located and with what number. Okay, as we continue, notice that the next one, we have negative 2 times x squared equals 8. So there's only one number on that side. I'm going to have to undo the multiplication. I'm going to divide both sides by negative 2. That'll get rid of the negative 2's on the left, leaving you with x squared. Notice that that's going to equal 8 divided by negative 2, which is negative 4. Now I can take the square root of both sides to get the x by itself. Once again, I want to show you in your calculator. If you were to do this, then I'm going to take the square root. Oops, here, I got to clear all. Take the square root. I'm going to plug in the negative 4. And then notice that on the far right, it once again says undefined. Or if you're typing it into your calculator, it's going to say the word error. And remember, that's because we never, ever want a negative number under the square root. So when that's the case, that is an error. And so remember, we can't say a number. We're going to say no real solution. So that's why it's super important not to lose any negative signs because sometimes we're not going to have a real answer. If I take a look at the next example, I've got two numbers on the same side as the x squared. So I'm going to move the number that is not attached. Positive 8, the opposite would be a negative. So I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. That gets rid of it there. We'll have 5x squared. That's going to equal 8 minus 8, which is 0. I'm going to then divide both sides by 5 to get the x squared by itself. 0 divided by 5 is going to be 0. Now that the x squared is isolated by itself, I can take the square root. Remember, we normally have two answers. However, there is no such thing as both a positive as well as a negative 0. So I don't need that plus or minus sign in front. We can just put the number 0. But once again, remember, we really do technically have two answers. It's just the same number twice. Okay, last example we're going to do together before I have you try one by yourself. Notice how 16 plus 4x squared equals 32. We've got two numbers on the same side as the x squared. 16 is the number that is not connected, so I have to move that first. Because it's positive, the opposite of a positive is a negative. So I'm going to subtract 16 to both sides. That will then get rid of the 16 on the left, leaving you just with the 4x squared. 32 minus 16 is 16. I then still have to get rid of the 4. The opposite of multiplication means let's divide both sides by 4. That gets rid of the 4 on the left, giving you x squared to then equal 16 divided by 4, which is 4. Now that the x squared is isolated by itself, I'm going to take the square root of both sides, and I'm not going to forget that I have both a positive as well as a negative answer. Square root of 4 is going to be 2. So we have both a positive 2 as well as a -2. And then, like I said, I would like you to pause the video and try this checkpoint problem, please. So hopefully you pause the video and you notice that, hey, got to move the 4 first. So subtract that, you get 288 on the right. We also have to move the 2 by dividing. That gives you x squared to equal 144. Now the x squared is isolated by itself. When I take the square root, I have 2 answers, both a positive as well as a -12.